Hi everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me clearly. We did do a test, let me know if any of you are struggling to hear us as we start. Thank you very much for joining. I think we're going to kick off now, even though we have a couple more minutes, but we may as well just get started. Thank you everyone for joining our first webinar of 2020. Apologies for the echo you might be experiencing, but once Vee gets underway, she'll be using a headset, so the sound quality will improve. So first off, my name is Sophie. I'm the Sales and Marketing Administrator for OpenAthens, and I'll be facilitating the webinar today with Vee. So we just wanted to go over some quick housekeeping. First off, so move over to the next slide. There we go. So just so you all know, we are recording the webinar today. So the recording will be available on our YouTube channel and will be emailed out to you at the end. So if you miss anything, you'll be able to hear everything in its entirety again. Secondly, if you do have any questions, please use the Q&A chat function at the bottom of the screen. And we'll get to all the questions at the end of Vee's presentation, and we'll talk through those. And lastly, we do really value your feedback. So after the webinar, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with some survey questions in. So if you could let us know how you feel about this webinar and what your experience was, that would be really, really good. So it's 4:05 now, and unless anyone has any issues, I'm just going to pass over to Vee. Yeah. So I'll go on mute and we'll get going.
Get the headphones headset on. Hopefully that will improve the sound quality for most of you. We did hear earlier that there is some kind of echo in the meeting room in our brand new offices here in Bristol. Thank you everybody for joining today. It's fantastic to have you all, and I appreciate very much that you've decided to spend an hour or half an hour or so with us today. You know, your attention and your time is really the most valuable thing that anyone has. So I do appreciate you chose today's webinar as something to do. So today I'll be talking about recommendations for improved user experience. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Vee Rogacheva. I'm the user experience and service designer for the OpenAthens team. I am based in our offices in the UK, but available and happy to answer questions from all around the world. That's absolutely no problem. Today's presentation is primarily aimed at publishers, any apps or services. The recommendations are structured in a way that perhaps will be more relevant to this type of audience. In any case, the user experience recommendations are also applicable to libraries. I know we were expecting a couple of librarians to join the call as well. So application of user experience recommendation can be relevant to library portals, or even when libraries look to procure certain services, they may be looking at ways in which the user experience is designed in those services that they're looking to implement for their patrons. Okay, so hello, this is me. I've already said that. And I believe that poor UX is a barrier to knowledge. It is as simple as that. If the experience is poorly designed, it becomes difficult for users to navigate any digital experience, whether that's a publisher platform or a service or an app. Those frictions that poor user experience introduce in the user journey lead to something called user attrition. This is basically when users lose patients and go and find a similar service or the same service elsewhere. That attrition, depending on the service, can vary from a couple of seconds. This is the time that users take to make a quick decision whether they will invest the time and energy to navigate the site before they bounce and look for something else, to, of course, a bit longer time for some of the services and digital experiences where perhaps the alternatives, there are fewer alternatives, or the alternatives are offer a similar experience. In any case, a poor user experience impacts us all. And even if the experience within the education and kind of information management industry is not great, that we shouldn't be okay with that, and we shouldn't be okay with the fact that users are frustrated and are losing patience when they use our services. Now, the things that I'm going to be talking today, I will talk a little bit about accessibility, which I think is really important, and it is going to be kind of a dominating topic throughout 2020 for a number of reasons I'm going to mention later. I will talk about the RA21 and NISO recommendations for institutional access. Obviously, OpenAthens is an expert in institutional access and SAML access, so we'll offer some expertise in that space. And I'll talk a little bit about usability testing and communicating with users towards the end of the presentation. Now, things that I will not cover, and I do apologize for if someone is disappointed, is I'm not going to talk about usability research. These are the type of things you can do throughout the life cycle of your digital services. It's a vast topic. I can have a separate webinar just talking about research, so I'll leave that out for today. But if there is an interest, I'm happy to share experience in that area. Not going to talk about user journeys either. I have in previous webinars covered a bit of insight from our research into student learners and researchers accessing content and how the various user journeys look. So if you want to find out a little bit about that, there are webinar recordings available on our YouTube channel. And I think maybe Sophie can send a link to that later on for those of you who are interested. I'm not going to cover the experience for individual subscribers. So if you are a publisher or you offer a service to individual subscribers, this is not a case that I will be covering today. I'm mostly looking at the institutional experience, so users that are associated with some kind of library accessing publisher platforms or digital services online. I don't want to go too much into detail about IP versus federated access technology. I'm a designer, not a technologist anyway. But if there are questions at the end, I'll do my best to answer, and if not, I'll pass them over to someone who's better placed than me to provide an answer. Okay, so here it is. Recommendations for improved UX. There's 10 of them. That's number 1 is accessibility, 2 institutional access button, 3 group access options together, 4 highlight primary access option, 5 minimize the steps to access, 6 institutional discovery, 7 deep linking, 8 helpful error messages, 9 test with users, and 10 communicate with libraries. That's it, job done. I will go into a little bit more detail to some of those. So as I'm going through the slide deck, so starting with accessibility, similar to research, that is a vast topic, and it deserves a webinar of its own. So I will try and summarize it, but again, happy to explore further if need be. what is accessibility and what do we mean when we talk about accessibility, particularly in the design of digital services space? Now, it really not helpful that access and accessibility are kind of closely related. They have the same word origin, but accessibility refers to making websites and mobile apps accessible to users that may have difficulties navigating those services. So that would be people with impaired vision, motor difficulties, cognitive impairments or learning disabilities, deafness or impaired hearing. And again, accessibility is not only about color contrast and color size. When we talk about motor difficulties, for example, there's some interesting implications for digital services, but cognitive impairments and learning disabilities is another really quite a vast group of disabilities where in the world of research and education, we really need to be very considerate when we put content out there and when we deliver services out there, that we don't exclude certain users because of the way that our platforms are and services are designed. Now, according to the government digital services in the UK, 1 in 5 people has a long-term illness, impairment, or disability, and many more have something called temporary disability. So when we talk about disabilities, we don't always talk about the permanent state, someone missing a limb, for example. These days, designers refer to accessibility issues when in something called temporary situations, where someone may have a broken arm, or maybe holding a baby in one arm, or holding a cup of coffee in one arm and then a laptop in another. Is quite a common case here in the office. You can see people going around with 2 hands basically disabled and they can't open a door. What happens in that case? So it is, again, it is a very broad topic, but the point is, and the reason why I'm raising this first, and this is among my first recommendation, is that if we're not addressing accessibility needs of our audiences, we're excluding certain number of users from our services. JISC study from last year found that 15 to 16% of students in the UK use assistive technology. Now, assistive technology are tools that help users navigate digital experiences, whether that's screen readers or magnifiers. The group of that type of tools is called assistive technologies. And you can see on the graph there is a split between further education and higher education. The percentages are very similar when we look at teaching staff. Again, between 15 and 70% would use assistive technology, whether because that's a vital part of the way they interact with the digital world, or they use it by choice. So it just makes it easier for them to interact with digital services. It's irrelevant. That the fact is that they prefer and they choose to use such technologies. That means that if our platforms and our services in the digital space are not able to work with that assistive technology, we are excluding these type of users. We are not enabling we're not available for them. Basically, they will go and try and find a similar service elsewhere. Now, there is, if that's not a good enough reason, and I think the not excluding people and being inclusive when we design online experiences is good enough reason, but if it isn't, there is a regulatory framework in place. So in Europe, in the UK and in Europe, that's the Equality Act of 2010, which is the UK regulation, and the EU public sector body accessibility regulation is the EU-wide one. There is a similar regulatory framework in the US, and there's other countries that are looking to introduce, if they haven't introduced yet, similar regulation. So accessibility is something that we shouldn't just make available in the UK, or it is something that our global users will benefit from. So the latest regulation, which is the EU Public Sector Body Accessibility Regulation, is already in force for new websites. They need to be accessible. The deadline was last year, September. Existing websites and platforms have, the deadline is September this year, and that's the reason why I think accessibility is going to be high on everybody's agenda this year. For mobile apps, we have a bit more time to redesign our services. And what the regulatory framework has in mind is a accessibility standard, which is called WCAG. And it's WCAG 2.1, 2.0 and 2.1 up to level AA that most regulatory requirements are. They request that we take our services up to that standard level of AA. The type of things that the standard suggests are, for example, provide text alternatives for non-text content, make it easier for users to see and hear content, including separating foreground from background, make all functionality available from keyboard, make web pages appear and operate in a predictable way, which is an interesting one. So this speaks to consistency of the experience, not only across one platform and one solution, but across different platforms and different solutions, so that we are building on the user's experience elsewhere, and we're not asking from them to learn from scratch how to navigate the service. And another interesting thing is help users avoid and correct mistakes. So help avoid is the best approach, but when a mistake happens, they need to be able to recover from that error, correct the mistake, and move on. There is something called the voluntary product accessibility template, which is available for anyone who delivers services to public sector bodies to complete on a voluntary basis and offer as a statement of compliance to the accessibility regulations. There is a link to those templates, which we're going to send later on with the presentation, so you can check the templates themselves. And if you're interested, we go on and complete a template and kind of express your compliance with those standards. From an OpenAthens perspective, we can already see quite a lot of prospect customers coming to us, asking us about our regulation compliance, how much to what extent we comply with the regulation. And we have been asked on a number of occasions to complete this template. I'm not sure whether we are in the process of completing one and offering one to everybody, but we certainly will at some point. Now, I've taken the liberty to assess a couple of services, and this is not to pick on anyone in particular. This is just to illustrate a way that you could assess your own services. I've used the inbuilt development tool and accessibility assessment tool from Chrome. So it's a Chrome default feature that anyone can use. So I've tested the Geological Society, the University of Sheffield Library Portal, and the Institute of Physics. And you can see the scores on the screen. Now, if you ask me what's a good score, I can tell you that a good score is 100. And nothing less, unfortunately, because accessibility doesn't work in percentages. So if you're 90% on like the Institute of Physics, if it's a high percentage, you will be excluding less people, which again, it's not a great place to be. So 100 is a good score. Anything less than 100 means you will need to do some work in order to improve the platform. It's not only about colors and font size. A lot of the work that you will need to do is development. It's code. The ability, for example, to navigate the platform using just the keyboard is completely within the realm of software development. This is done using code. The automated tools can only pick up a limited number of accessibility issues. It definitely gives you an indication of the amount of work and investment that you will have to do. But in an ideal case scenario, you would want to test your services with people with disabilities. The Short Trust here in the UK offers such service. There are other services internationally that you can look into. But in an ideal case scenario, you will be testing with people with accessibility needs. And based on those tests, you will be looking to improve your services on an ongoing basis. That's accessibility out the way, and I realize it does take a little bit of time to talk about accessibility because it's such a complex topic. But I truly believe that if we addressed the accessibility requirements and the accessibility needs, making our platforms inclusive, we will fundamentally be improving the user experience for everybody. So that will tick a lot of boxes for all users, not only the users with the accessibility needs. Now, moving on to the next couple of recommendations, starting with the institutional access button. These are recommendations on the back of RE21 and NISO recommendations, which were published last year. So I'm just building on that, giving a couple of examples for those of you who want to know a little bit more how the recommendations work in context. So the number 2 recommendation on my list is the introduction of institutional access button. This is how the button looks like according to the RE21 recommendations. You can see on the left-hand side, the very top one, it comes straight out of the recommendations. The versions underneath are options which are also acceptable as long as the terminology, the taxonomy is the same. So access through your institution is consistent. It doesn't really matter what button you use, as long as the users see the same consistent message on the different platforms. The recommendations, recommendations of NISO will be fulfilled because we'll be providing consistent experience across platforms. Now, unfortunately, the reality out there is what you see on the right-hand side, so that there is no consistency. There are lots of confusing institutional login options. And in some cases where publishers don't have SAML capabilities, there isn't an institutional login option at all. So users that are associated with libraries cannot log in directly at the publisher platform. They will need to go back to their library portal and follow a link from there. So in a way, if you don't offer an institutional login option on your platform, that becomes a dead end for those users that are searching and trying to access content directly rather than via their library portals. Group access options together. So what that recommendation explores is, at the moment there's quite a varied option of where the login call to actions are placed on the different platforms. So this is an example from Taylor and Francis, and you can see two call to action buttons on their platform. So one is right above the article, the other one is on the top navigation. There are more options on the platform which are further below the fold or further down the page, which I'm going to show you in the next slide. But if we were to take this particular recommendation forward, you can see something like this. So if we were to group those options, you could take those two options, introduce access through institution as a top navigation, and kind of organize a login area in one specific place on the platform. Another example from Taylor and Francis, this is exactly the same article further down the page. At the bottom of the abstract, there's even more login options. And if we were to take that recommendation forward, this is what it could be, right? We group those options so that users don't have to choose and be distracted by different call to actions around the page. Highlight primary access option. Most publishers in working with libraries in the academic world, offering content to learners and researchers, the majority of their users will be associated with a library in one form or another. So a logical thing would be to have as a primary access option that institutional login option rather than the individual user login option. However, for historical reasons and the prevailing use of proxy, that's not what we are seeing out there. However, a recommendation would be to highlight a primary option, whatever that is, and if your platform, the majority of the users to your platform are direct or individual users indeed, then by all means highlight that option. So here's an example from Emerald. We can see a number of options in their top navigation. They're grouped, which is fantastic, but it's not really clear which one is the primary option. If we apply this recommendation, this is how it could look like. So we're taking a little bit of weight from register and login and adding the weight to the institutional login options, making that clear that this is the primary option. Colleagues from JSTOR, quite a lot of login options. The primary option, if you look at this particular example, seem to be download for $10 because of the weight that they've added to the download button and how prominent and close to the article is. I would argue this is a dark pattern because I would imagine, I can imagine the most users of JSTOR already have some kind of institutional access. They are a member of a library, but that's a conversation that I'm happy to have with anyone from JSTOR. So a slight redesign could be something like this, where we take off some of that load of those paid for options and we add that to the institutional login option. Minimize steps to access. an example from Science Direct to illustrate that. So they do have a single sign-in option at the very top navigation, which is fantastic, which then you click, which then prompts you to sign in with your email. And if you have your magnifier and you pay a lot of attention, you can find out that you can sign in with your institution in the small print underneath the continue button. So you have to click that, and then that takes you to find your institution discovery option, where you have to follow a couple more steps before you can actually log into Science Direct. So this is a multi-step journey to something that should be really straightforward. The more steps we add, the more friction, the easier it is for users to just drop in that journey. So a redesign could be that we give that access through your institution priority. We stick it straight into the top navigation alongside the other login options and minimize those, eliminate the need for most of those steps in the journey. Institutional discovery. Another recommendation coming straight from the RA21 and NISO recommendations. So their recommendation is for consistent institutional discoveries. For those of you who have an institutional login option, there's a number of ways you can approach that, but within that institutional login or institutional access, users are asked to find their institutions and log in with their institutional credentials. So some kind of institutional discovery is required in that process. So this is a screenshot from the RA21 recommendation. So you can see how they've outlined the recommended discovery function. This, unfortunately, is how the variety of options out there that are currently live on a number of platforms. So at OpenAthens, we have our own institutional discovery product. It's called the Wayfinder. It is free for anyone to use. So instead of developing your own, you could use our hosted Wayfinder, and I'm gonna quickly show you how that looks. I hope with live demo it's gonna work. So these are our colleagues from the BMJ best practice. You can see they have followed some of the recommendations already. They have prioritized their and combined their login options at the very top of the screen. In their case, that loads another page, which is fine, and it gives a different login options. So on the left-hand side, you have the individual direct users, and on the right-hand side, you have that institutional access button. So when you click that, that takes you to the OpenAthens Wayfinder. So this is the product, as I mentioned, that we offer for free to the publishing community out there. Some libraries are using it as well to protect different types of content. So it is available for anyone who's interested. So the way it works is I would look for University of Bristol, for example, or Bristol City College. Oh, there it is, University of Bristol. And that now redirects me to their single sign-on page. So this requests institutional credentials that unfortunately I don't have. I'm not a student of the University of Bristol. So I'll just go back. So what happened, because I couldn't complete the transaction, obviously I can't go complete the login process, but the Wayfinder would remember my choice. So you can see if I try to go back, it remembers that I've selected University of Bristol, so that next time I come back here, it will be easier for me to complete that journey. So I don't have to search for every time. My previous choice is already remembered. Now that works across different platforms. So Karger is another publisher we work with. Their experience is very similar. I have an institutional login option right here, which triggers the Wayfinder, which now recognizes my choice, even though I've made the choice on the BMJ side. The Karger experience picks that up, and this is because they are both using the OpenAthens Wayfinder as part of that institutional discovery. The Wayfinder works is aligned with RA21 recommendations and works across federations, as far as I know. So if you're interested, get in touch. My colleagues will be happily tell you more about it. These are a couple of options that we're working on. So embedded Wayfinder, you can see how that institutional discovery can be implemented on the platform directly, so that the users are not redirected to a different page or a layover that kind of blocks the page and triggers that institutional discovery without again taking the user to a different page. So the final couple of recommendations, I'm going to whiz through very quickly because there really isn't that much that I can use to illustrate. So number 7 is implement seamless access to title level, or also known as deep linking. It is quite technical, so I don't want to go into too much detail about it, but what that does in essence from a user experience point of view is allows a seamless journey to content going through that authentication process. Users are then redirected back to their starting point rather than to a home page, for example. So if I was a researcher starting my research with Google Scholar, trying to access an article directly at an article level, and I'm going through that authentication process, I'm then redirected back to that same article I started rather than at a home page or a different page, and which would then require that the user finds the article again. So it really aids the user experience. It makes it easier for users to know where they are after the authentication is complete. Helpful error messaging. It is absolutely critical, and it is part of the accessibility framework as well. We are not there sitting with users all the time, so we can't explain to them what is happening. All they see is an error message, and quite often those messages just make absolutely no sense to them because they are techno speak, or even worse, just a number like 404 or 508 or whatever the error is, which may mean something to our development team but means nothing to the users. It's really a helpful message that will help them recover, understand what the issue is, and look for help is all that it's needed. Penultimate recommendation, test with users before making any changes. So whatever you think it's a good idea, even just implementing an institutional access button at the top of your navigation, no matter that it's a RA21 recommendation or that I've just said we have to do it, test with users regardless. Your audience may have specific needs that you may need to address. So validate a small number of tests is all you need in order to make those validations. Do it as quickly and as often as you need to throughout the process of introducing change to your platform. And a final one, communicate upcoming changes and give libraries time to prepare. It's not unusual for publishers to make changes on their platforms without informing the libraries, assuming that end users will just pick the change up. Like when we leave libraries out of the loop, we don't give them an opportunity to educate and communicate with their patrons, with their subscribers. And that really is just unnecessary. So I would strongly encourage you, before you do any changes, to tell libraries. An example would be probably 2 years ago, a lot of publishers made change from HTTP to HTTPS, which they thought wouldn't be much of a issue, but it caused a lot of problems for librarians who had to change all their links on all their system. Access certainly suddenly broke down, and nobody was sure what was happening. And of course, that's patrons and library subscribers that suffer at the end, which are ultimately our customers. So libraries do play an important role in communicating with them, and it's important that we give them enough time to react. That's it. Any questions?
Thank you, Vee, on behalf of everyone who's watching. So we have a few questions to kick off. So firstly, it's a question from Lola, who said, we use Wayfinder on our institutional sign-in page and wonder how to advise customers concerned about duplicates. Yeah, the first question.
Yes. Yes, thank you very much for that, Lola. It's a really interesting question, and I believe that question was sent ahead of time, and thank you for that, because it gave me a bit of time to check with my team and prepare a half-decent answer, because it is quite a technical question. Now, we can't be 100% certain why you are seeing duplicates in this particular case. We suspect a couple of things. So there may be an issue on the side of the customer, so the library, and the way they have set up access. There might be some duplication there. So I would certainly look for solutions in that space, and would suggest, you probably advise them to escalate the issue either directly to us or through our partners. So if it's a customer in the US, for example, where we work closely with EBSCO, there may be EBSCO may be providing support for OpenAthens on the ground. So I would suggest they escalate that to them for their teams to look into. We believe that the issue may be caused because that particular customer you gave us an example of belongs, maybe that they belong to more than one federation. So again, this is very technical. We're going in a very technical ground here, but they may be a member of InCommon as well as the OpenAthens Federation, and that may cause duplications. It doesn't seem like it's affecting access, so users can click on any and get access, but in any case, duplications like this introduce a friction. It's not a good experience. I completely agree with you, and we should look for ways to resolve that. So yeah, thank you very much for putting that question forward.
So we have another question which says, could chatbots be a solution for explaining and solving error messages?
Yes, good question. Might be. Chatbots are a tool like any other tool. We can test, try, see if it works. We can certainly use that, but it seems like solving a problem with technology where in many cases the error messages don't need to be in code. there is no need to show 404 on a page. And if any developer who's trying to convince you that, it's just not, you can put any text on a error page, including the 404 message. And a lot of services out there are taking even a slightly more fun approach to it. I don't know if you've come across error pages where you have small games to play while something is going on the background, or there's a picture of sad cats or sad animals that something has gone wrong. So it's up to you to build your experience and to build the experience that you want your customers and your users to have. In a 404 on a white page is just not a good experience. You can say, oops, something went wrong, please go back, and that may be good enough in your case.
Great, so we have another question, which says, do you have an opinion of when the best time is to communicate changes to librarians? And I think this was in a specific example for academic librarians.
Good question. It is, there isn't a timeline. I mean, as soon as you know that you will be making a change, even if there's still a bit of time ahead, and I know a lot of you will be working in some kind of agile development framework, which means that you probably can't commit to a delivery. Starting the conversation as early as possible is really important. If nothing else, you can use librarians as testers. They can give you opinion and feedback early on in the process and be part of the process rather than be a tick box at the end where the feature is already live. I'm not suggesting you holding live, going live with a feature just to communicate with librarians. So if you include them in the process, you'll be building on the background, but communicating the upcoming change with them so they can provide feedback, and maybe that will impact your whole project, who knows.
Great, so that's all the questions that we've had through. So if we go on to the next slide. So if you have any other questions, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with all the information that we've gone through, and you can contact that email address. It's contact@openathens.net. That will be at the end of the slide as well, for you to jot down. Or you can contact Vee personally and ask her any questions that you might have. So there was a few kind of follow-up opportunities for you to actually meet Vee in person and have many more UX conversations. So the first one is a publisher meetup that we have in London at the end of this month. And this is just a very informal get-together. It will be at a Waterstones cafe on Gower Street in London, where Vee and also our key client services manager, Phil, which I'm sure a lot of you know as well, will be attending. And that's just an opportunity for you guys to all have an informal chat about anything publisher and UX and service, UX and service related topics. Secondly is our annual conference, which is on the 19th of March. So I'm sure you guys have all heard about this in some shape or form, but it's where we have over 150 international publishers and library professionals from all over very different industries come together and talk about all things identity and access management. We do still have tickets remaining, so if you guys are interested in that would be great, and you can register to attend. And Vee will also have her own UX corner there as well, so you can ask her again any questions or have any conversations that you see fit. And our next webinar is on the 12th of Feb, and it's on the missing link in the publishing cycle. So I'll send out the registration link for that webinar as well, and that will also be with the lovely Vee as well. So you'll be seeing her on the 12th of February. So no need to write any of this down. As I said, it will all be emailed to you, as well as a feedback survey. And I think that's actually everything from us. Unless anyone has a last minute question, we'll let you go 8 minutes early. So thank you so much everyone for joining, and have a lovely evening or lovely day, depending on where you are. We're going to have a nice rainy evening in Bristol because the weather is awful. But yeah, see you next time, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Everyone.